the person that has shaped our Western understanding of sex more than any other was a gentleman by the name of Augustine. And Augustine was a brilliant theologian, brilliant philosopher. But one of the things he wrote in his book, The Confessions, is that the frenzy of lust gripped me and I surrendered myself entirely to lust. And, Augustine was alive in the 4th century. So we're not talking about internet porn. We're talking about, for him, it was orgies and the desire for an affair. And so he developed a very severe theology, I think rooted in his self-hatred of his own sexual fantasies and arousals. And, any time you have a level of self-hatred about something inside of you, you're not going to develop a very healthy theology or psychology out of that. And I think that is central to a lot of just the way that religion approaches this topic of unwanted sexual behavior, is that there's a lot of language of just don't do it, flee sexual immorality, run from it. But they don't really invite anyone to understand their own sexual mind. So I think of, a passage like Romans 12:2 that says, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's almost no Christian framework to help people to understand their sexual mind. And if you don't understand your sexual mind and why you're drawn to particular themes or fantasies, you're really not going to be able to outgrow it because you're constantly trying to suppress it. And suppression is a bit like putting a beach ball underwater. It works for a little bit, but the role of the beach ball is to just keep coming to the surface. And that's what I think, a lot of religious frameworks have never really invited people to understand, that just their own sexual story, their own sexual desires from a standpoint of curiosity, grace, and understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when you have a shame-based operating system, everything's filtered through that in a way that it's almost like you don't even have the ability to frame or process those desires in any other way. Mm-hmm. And there is this like dichotomy of approaches. One that you just mentioned, the more heavy-handed, severe approach, religious-based approach of suppress, don't do it. And then on the other hand, we live in a culture that is oriented towards, satisfy yourself without restraint. And so I'm curious, in your perspective, like the answer to this is not this. Where does sexual health and sexual integrity lie in this whole bigger equation? I don't hear you saying that it's in just suppressing it. I also don't know that I hear you saying that it's in go out and satisfy every appetite that you've ever had. Where, in your view, do you find the balance, or the like a truly integrated, authentic, healthy sexuality that is, governed with integrity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So going back to what you're saying with regard to shame, like I think that that's so central for us to begin to grapple with, is where is a lot of my shame or our shame driving us to these behaviors. So when the neuroscientists talk about shame, they talk about it in terms of like, they make the analogy of 3 different pedals on like a manual transmission car. So we have this, sympathetic nervous system is the gas pedal, the parasympathetic is the brake pedal, and then the clutch would be, the 3rd pedal on the car. When we are born, we are all sympathetic nervous system, meaning we are all gas pedals. So we want to run through the world. We want to touch everything, taste everything. I mean, kids are all sympathetic nervous system. They don't have a parasympathetic nervous system of, like a braking system to say, no, that's probably not healthy. Don't do that. And so what the neuroscientists say happens with shame is that when people are exploring the world around them and kind of very curious about sex or porn, And then someone comes in and begins to kind of hit the gas pedal or hit the brake pedal. If you hit that brake pedal without the clutch of kindness, if you've ever driven a manual transmission car, you know that the whole car kind of does not gently die, it jolts forward. And that neurologically is what happens with regard to shame in our lives. So, given that we as, men and women, but in this conversation on men, are all sympathetic nervous system creatures when we are children, we need to really help men to understand their sexual arousal and desire. So when you are 13 years of age, you have something like a shot glass of testosterone in your system. By the time you reach the age of 15, that goes up to, a pint glass of testosterone. So if your whole system is don't do something, well, what is a 14, 15-year-old boy supposed to think about when his body is beginning to, in a way, take over? So that sense of the sympathetic nervous system. So do we need to teach people how to break and how to honor? Yes, but we also have to teach them to understand their bodies. We have to teach them to understand arousal. We have to teach them to understand the role of sexual fantasies in their life. So if we don't equip people to understand their sexual story, I think we're consigning a whole generation of people to a lot of struggle in that. So I would say that to the religious component or sector of this is that you've got to equip people to understand their bodies and give them a framework that's not just about trying to manage their behavior. But then I would say, there's a whole progressive side that would make shame the primary problem. And so if we can just get rid of shame in people's lives with regard to their choices, then people are just going to naturally get healthy. And that doesn't work either. And so I think of, this philosopher by the name of Levinas, and he says that ethics begins in the face of the other. And I think that's what we have to consider with regard to our own sexual formation. Are my sexual choices good not only for my own heart and my own body, but have I considered the heart and the body and the story of those that I am moving towards? So I think, just simple things like consent, desire. Do you know someone's story? Is what they're participating not just their own free choice, but is there a trauma history that's informing this? And so I would love to see more men kind of grapple with, if I have unaddressed trauma and heartache in my life, how, am I joining in a particular industry that preys off of trauma? And to me, that's where the evil and the heartbreak of the sex industry comes in, is we have this whole demand side that has a lot of heartbreak, a lot of unaddressed trauma, and the desire to find power over that trauma, creating even more trauma and heartbreak for people who also have adverse childhood experiences in their background. So I think if we really grapple with, our own story and our own sense of our own humanity, I think that begins to kind of say, is what I'm doing good and right and beautiful for the other person as well? So I think that's where the integrity piece begins.